Hello Facebook Live, I'm Glen Norris from the Courier Mail and welcome. Tonight we're talking about the essentials of business. We have a great panel tonight to talk about just on those issues. Feel free to listen in or come back to the broadcast as we progress during the night. I might just do a little bit of homework and just discuss what we're going to talk about first. We'll be looking at how business grows in the first instance, then looking at corporate governance, and finally exit plans and succession planning. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce each of our panellists, and first starting with Rajeev.
Hi, good evening. Thanks, Glenn. Happy to be here. Thanks for the invite. General Manager of Sunstate Cement. Sunstate Cement has been around for about 36 years, so this is our 36th year in operation. We service mainly the southeast Queensland and northern New South Wales market. Cement has been a very long history. It has been around for close to 200 years. And one of the interesting facts around cement is that concrete, which uses cement as one of the main ingredients, it is the second largest, second most consumed quantity material on earth after water.
Amazing.
Yeah, it is. It is quite an amazing fact. People usually do confuse between cement and concrete, but we are the most engineered raw material into concrete, and concrete is one of the most used materials on earth. So it's a great privilege to be here, and I hope during the evening I'll be able to talk a little bit more about Sunstate Cement and what we bring to Southeast Queensland and building Southeast Queensland. So if you were crossing the river on the Gateway Bridge or on the Pacific Motorway or Clem 7 Tunnel, it's got Sunstate Cement in it. So
it's all Sunstate Cement.
It's all Sunstate Cement, and even around the corner here, some of the high rises here at Riparian Plaza, again, has got our material in it.
Maybe this floor we're standing on.
Probably. I haven't checked that. So, you know, it's an essential building material. Yeah. It's a very old building material. It's essential to nation building.
Yeah, that's
and
great.
We play a critical part in that.
Thanks, Rajeev.
So great to be here.
Yeah. Dennis, can you give an introduction of what you do at BDO?
Sure, thank you, Glenn. Thank you for the invitation as well to be on the panel. I'm a strategic advisor in M&A and China, so that effectively means I work with many entrepreneurs, and it's a very exciting space for me. Entrepreneurs that are looking and striving to go from, I say from 0 to 1, and then from 1 to 10, and then from 10 to 100. So people that experience all the highs and lows of growth, and at the same time, all the things that they need to think about, all the emotional roller coasters, the governance you need to think about along the way, the working capital constraints, and also tonight's topic, when do I and should I ever look at exiting or introduce new partners?
Thanks. Jack Steggall, you've got a fascinating business in the food nutrition area.
Yes, we have a nutritional food formulating business. I started the business with my wife, Linda, 26 years ago. We remain as the two directors and shareholders of the business. It mainly involves formulating, blending and repacking dry food ingredients supplied into the complementary healthcare market. These products are mainly in sachets, jars or pouches, supplied to products that sell to the retail sector through pharmacies and major supermarket outlets under their own brand. So the business is essentially formulating, blending, repacking. We carry a lot of inventory, big emphasis on the formulating part of the business, putting together highly differentiated premixes that meet our customers' requirements.
Great, thanks Jack. Yeah. Now business is all about opportunities and finding a gap in the market or a market opportunity. Rajeev, you were, Sunstate was founded about more than 30 years ago. during the sort of Bujolki-Peterson era, and if people old enough to remember that era, it was obviously highly controversial. But Rajeev, you were telling me before that it wasn't easy to get into the market during that time, and Sunstate had difficulties originally. Would you like to sort of give me a rundown of what happened?
Yeah, it's quite a remarkable story way back in the early 80s. At the time, it was a monopoly here in Queensland, and one of our current shareholders had the idea that Queensland might be an exciting market to be in, so they tried to get a foothold. And in those days, the port of Brisbane was owned by the government, and the government wouldn't allow them to find a foothold on the port,
Is that right?
area. So the very enterprising gentleman at the time, he actually got a leasehold on one of the container terminals on the river, and he decided to join together a number of containers to increase the capacity, and he got a 4,000-ton ship of cement pumped into these containers serially, and then he decoupled those containers and put it in the market. That is why they overcame that hurdle. And once that was broken, it then became very clear that those sort of hurdles won't stand in the way of entrepreneurial approach, and that is how Sunstate was born all those years ago.
That's a great story.
And then once that was broken, it was then we were invited to come and set up a facility on the site we are in on the Fisherman's Island.
Okay, that's a great story.
Yeah, it's a great story. And then from there, incrementally, we started building up the capacity. So started off very modestly with 500,000 tons. And 5 years down the track in the early 90s, it went up to 1 million tons. And in the 2010, we went up to 1.5 million tons, which is our current capacity. Yeah. So it's been a great journey along the way.
That's great.
Yeah.
And Jack, so with you, you started the business in 1992, I believe.
Yes.
What was the impetus for starting the business? You were in the food industry. You saw a gap in the market, or you just wanted to start your own business, or how did it all come about?
Yeah, I think the main driving force was, I did want to have my own business, and I was fortunate at the time that the company that I worked for in Sydney was going through a divestment process, and some products they were trying to get rid of, and my role as a marketing manager then was to find a home for some of these products, and I just found that it was difficult to find anybody else to take them on. So I was able to strike an arrangement with the management to set up my own little business in Queensland, manufacturing those products that they were divesting out of. So that was the genesis for our business. I always had an interest in the nutritional space. We thought back then that there was an opportunity to move into the healthcare area, and in our early days we did a lot of footwork around hospitals and nursing homes, aged care centres, trying to supply nutritional premixes into that market. But being a small business and up against some of the heavyweights, it was a hard slog, and we just did not make a lot of inroads. So the break for us was when we started doing some work for what is now Sanofi, or the old Bullivants, and they were looking for products for the complementary healthcare market, and so engaged the similar sort of skills that we had, but supplying into a different market, much higher volumes, because they had the clout to supply into pharmacies and health food shops all around Australia. So that was a big break for us when we started doing business with them. But that's how we started.
Yeah, great story. Dennis, so with businesses, you advise businesses on a daily basis. What's the biggest hurdle when businesses are starting off and growing initially that you find?
Yeah, I think talking about from that 0 to 1, for example, one of the recent businesses I've had the fortune of working with is a company called Bubs Australia, which is now a listed company and for which I chair. The market capitalisation of the company today is around 320 million. But I remember when I started working with the founders, the value of that business was less than 5 million, less than 3 years ago. But at the same time, it was a business that was founded on real belief.
So what does Bubs Australia do? Are they into the infant wear or?
So Bubs Australia is a company that started by Christy Carr and Anthony Guinaldi. Christy at the time had children, and she couldn't find baby food that she wanted that were commercially available on the market, and decided to start making her own food on the kitchen bench. And from then, sort of was the genesis of the business idea of starting organic baby pouch food. And so she was so Bubs was the first organic baby pouch food to have launched into Coles, and for 12 years, there was it was the genuine belief that built the brand and built the integrity and the honesty and the underlying values of the brand. And later on, she introduced some partners, and she then launched Gold Infant Formula, which is a gap in the market, and one of the highest growth categories. So, if you like, for a business starting out, hard work, perseverance, resilience, I think they're all essential criteria. The key there is, are you able to maintain that particular belief and understand that sometimes things take time and the patience. And I think it was great to hear Jack's story that having the patience, luck comes through.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Hard work makes luck, vice versa. Yeah. Both you gentlemen are in manufacturing. Manufacturing is obviously doing it tough, has always done it tough in Australia. We always hear about power prices. Is that a big issue for you guys? Power prices that have sort of surged in the last few years? Rajeev?
Yeah, for us, power is a big input cost. It's a big part of our cost of goods sold, if you like. So in the last 3 years, the power cost has virtually doubled. So that's quite a big concern for us to be competitive in the market. So we actively manage the procurement of power. There are various models available. We try, sometimes we hedge, sometimes we don't, sometimes we go to spot market. We have to work with some experts in the area to advise us what the future looks like. So on top of all the uncertainty about the energy policy from the political side, there is also all the environmental factors that affect power prices, like El Nino or La Nina, whatever the case may be. So they all weigh very heavily on the future pricing of power. So we typically look at a 2-year window and try to procure power for that time in the best advantageous mode available to us during that period. So it's a major consideration for us. Yes. And we actually model our operations around that. So given the overcapacity in our sector, we actually do ensure we run our power hungry equipment during the lower tariff hours.
Which is during the night?
Which is currently during the night. So we typically try to run from about 6 o'clock in the evening to about 7 o'clock in the morning. That changes a bit from quarter to quarter, but currently that's what we try to do. So because of the overcapacity, we're able to do that. But sometimes we have to run through the peak hours, and that's just a fact of life. So yeah, it is a big driver for us.
Yeah. Jack, what's the big issues for you in the food reduction or nutrition space?
Well, yeah, certainly not power. That has gone up, as Rajeev said, in the last few years, but it's not a significant cost to us, given the nature of our business. Our biggest cost is the workforce, is labour. That's where we are. That's our biggest overhead. But that's managed well. And we do focus on that area. We consider it to be important. We put a lot of money into training our staff, and we believe that if you do that, you get a better output from your staff. So, being our biggest overhead expense, we just see it as being very important. We engage the IML, Institute of Managers and Leaders, quite a lot, put our staff through training programs there to ensure that they are well equipped to do the job that they have to do. So unlike Rajeev's business, ours is not so capital intensive. We do have some pieces of equipment that do use up a fair bit of power and cost a fair bit of money, but it's not the main driver in our business. It's more around the people.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us. You're listening to Facebook Live event with BDO and CCIQ, and we're talking about the essentials of business. If you do want to ask any questions of our guests, please feel free to do so, and I'll pass them on and endeavour to get an answer for you. So moving on to corporate governance, the current Royal Commission into the banks and various other inquiries is showing failure of corporate governance at the top end of town. Corporate governance is obviously a big issue for businesses, whether they're small or large, and especially with more regulation and more oversight, health and safety, or financial regulation, human resources. How do businesses cope with that, and how do they organise their corporate governance? You're both different sized businesses. Rajeev, beginning with you.
Yeah, so my view on corporate governance is very simple. So as an executive of the business, I'm tasked with running the business. So where the board comes in is to ensure that I run the business properly. So they give the oversight to ensure that the business is run properly. Now, properly means obeying the laws of the land, being accountable, being transparent, and looking after the stakeholder interest. They are the four key main areas. So around that, our board is very simple, structured, not very complex, with a lot of subcommittees. We got 4 directors representing the 2 shareholders, and they bring different skill sets to the table, which is a great advantage to us. So there are people with slightly different experience and expertise on the board table, and they're able to bring insights that we may not have at Sunstate, which will enable you to look at best practices elsewhere. So that's a key component of that as well. And I think a lot of the times where the boards could go into 2 wrong directions. One is not being sufficiently involved in the business, or being too involved in the business. So the boards have to know enough about the business. When something is not quite right in the business, they can ask the right questions and they can get the right answers.
It's a balancing act, isn't it?
It is a very balancing act. So the board of directors cannot be managers of the business, but they need to know enough about the industry they are in to ask intelligent questions and to know when something is not quite right. And that's what I think with what you referred to, some of the big end of town.
Yes, so there wasn't enough oversight in some cases, and the directors were probably not, took their eye off the ball, basically. Exactly. And is that, being a director, it's obviously a big responsibility. So what is the most important stakeholder in a company? Is it the shareholders? Is it the employees? Is it the looking after the environment? Has that become more complex since you've been in business, Rajeev, or has it always been the case?
I think my own experience has been, perhaps I've been fortunate enough to be working with companies which thought that way. It's a balanced view that people need to take. At the end of the day, the shareholders who own the business, their interests are paramount. But that doesn't mean that it is at the expense of the environment or safety or employees, because For a business to be successful, all those things have to be managed well. You know, there is a cost to not managing safety well. There is a cost to not managing the environment well. There is a cost for not managing the people issues well. They all will affect the profitability of the business. So if the directors have that view, any business will look after the shareholders' interest at the same time as not sacrificing any of those. And I've been fortunate enough to be working in businesses which actually take that view.
Yeah, that's an excellent comment. Yeah. Dennis, you're on the board of a listed company now.
3 in fact.
3 listed companies.
Yes.
So you would obviously have a bird's eye view of this issue.
I imagine so.
Yes.
So
we're just getting to the question: what is the paramount interest of the directors? Is it in the interest of the shareholders, or is it the other stakeholders, employees?
Well,
has it been too focused on shareholders in the past?
Well, it's certainly been the year of corporate governance in Australia with the Royal Commission, but then also then with, let's say, an alternative school of thought through David Murray and John Wiley, where they've actually said, look, corporate governance is about, at the end of the day, effective business management. And I think with Australia, that's what it comes down to in terms of the simple, as Rajeev said, it's very important that the directors are there to act in the interest of all the stakeholders, especially the shareholders. From time to time, I think the agent theory has applied in terms of some of the directors have wanted to make sure that they discharge their own directors' responsibilities, and as a result, it's become death by reporting for management. And I think that we want to make sure that it's effective corporate governance.
But with the banks, that wasn't really the case. It sounds like they weren't taking an interest in what was going on in the company and all this malfeasance and things that have been obviously exposed by the Royal Commission. They weren't taking an interest. So it wasn't really death by reporting, was it? It was more.
Well, I think this is, and Glen, I think.
In some ways. Yeah.
Well, Glen, I think this is where it becomes very interesting in terms of this is a very large organisation, as in the big banks are very large organisations, and without knowing all the detail, attending 12 meetings in a year doesn't allow you to actually understand all the underlying detail of a particular bank. So how do you then achieve effective corporate governance as a director on the board? Do you then naturally sort of swing the pendulum to say, well, I need to make sure I protect myself, but in doing so, are the interests still aligned? And I think this is where it's very interesting, where coming back to when you're an entrepreneur, and at first you just need to manage your own business. You just run your own business. But when the business gets bigger, you need some additional advice. You need some independent advice. So then you might introduce an advisory board. And then later on, you might need some genuine independence because you now have other shareholders because you're now listed, or you could be an unlisted public company, or you could actually have several third-party shareholders such that you need to actually introduce the board. It's always difficult for a business owner to sell the business or sell part of the business and still not run it. Because there's a sense it's your baby, so to then sort of then get to that balance and medium of achieving that effective corporate governance is not easy.
And I think we've seen that in the US with companies like Facebook and Elon Musk's. They seem to grow incredible pace, and they're entrepreneurs basically. And then obviously the problems with Facebook have sort of revealed some issues around how the business has grown and issues around probably corporate governance or the way they are looking after customers. Yeah.
And it's what I can say is not easy being a director on of a company. Certainly not easy being a chair. But it's a challenge that for me it's very enjoyable because you still get to see a business grow and you get to work with very, very capable executives, and you work on some really, really interesting companies. but it is a very delicate balance.
Yeah.
One needs to make sure that you are being very effective as a board, and as Rajeev said, without being too involved.
Yeah, it's a balancing act. Yeah. Jack, you're a small company, family-owned company. You and your wife are directors, I believe. How is the corporate governance area for you? It's obviously different from a listed company.
I would suggest a bit easier. There's only 2 shareholders as opposed to multiple shareholders.
You have to keep the wife happy though, right?
Well, I do, and there's no point arguing with the wife anyway. That part of the job is easy. So our focus is mainly on the customers, the suppliers, the employees, and so we can put more emphasis on them and less emphasis on us if we so choose. And that is pretty much the way we have run our business over the 26 years. We have returned a lot of money back into the business rather than taking it in dividends. We've put an enormous emphasis on those areas involving staff and other governance issues that make it a better, safer place to work. So it hasn't been a big challenge for us, bar maybe the last 4 or 5 years when we went through something of a growth spurt, where we did have to attend and focus to that area more attentively. Prior to that, our mindset was sort of not so much in the governance area, but we do realise that today, now that we had to focus on that fairly strongly. But we haven't had to worry about shareholders very much, and I think that's made our job a lot easier. We've just been able to focus on the employees, the customers, setting everything up to comply with industry standards around that.
Yeah. And I suppose being in the food industry, the regulatory standards are very high, and you have to have everything right in that regard.
Well, we do. There's various accreditation that we have to go through with the HACCP and the Department of Agriculture, Water Resources. We have customer audits. So yeah, there's a fair bit going on in that space, and we're able to focus on that quite well without worrying too much about external influences.
Thanks, Jack. Well, thanks for joining us on the Facebook Live event with BDO and CCIQ. We're talking about business essentials, how business start, how businesses grow, and issues around corporate governance, which is a hot topic at the moment. Businesses always have to plan for the future, whether that's growing into export markets or growing domestically, launching new products, or even exiting the business through a sale or a takeover. Rajeev, you've got 2 big shareholders who've been with Sunstate since the start. So it's more probably for you, it's about growing the business. Do you sort of plan ahead for how big you want to be or what market you want to get into? How does it sort of work for you, sort of planning ahead?
I think it is. It's a very interesting journey that Sunstate has had. I mean, cement as a commodity. I mean, I hate to use the word commodity, but cement is perceived as a commodity. So one of the challenges we have is how to change that perception to, when it is a commodity, it's interchangeable. Sunstate cement is as good as any other cement.
Yeah.
So what we have tried to do there is provide a value proposition for our customers, where product is only one of the components of that. There are other things that come with dealing with Sunstate. So when a customer rings to place an order to the time when that money is collected from that customer, there are a number of touch points for that customer. So for that entire journey, we like to have the customer to have a fantastic experience. And that's what makes us different, we believe, in the marketplace. We have done customer surveys that back that up. So once you know what you want to offer, then a lot of the questions you ask get answered. Obviously, cement being a low value product doesn't travel long distances. So the logistics cost then becomes the more, and it's very difficult to export from Australia because the costs are very high. So I'll give you an example. We are on the port. I could actually toss a container from my site onto a passing ship, literally, but it cost me $60 a ton to actually put a container on the wharf. That's a reality. But in spite of that, we've actually managed to carve out some niche markets in the export area.
Okay.
So we export to New Zealand and a few other neighboring countries like PNG, Vanuatu, etc. And that's being very innovative and very agile in what we do when there is an opportunity out there. We also, in the last 3 years, we have launched some new products, which is quite rare in our industry because, as I said, we've been around for 200 years. So, it's not like the tech space where you actually change very rapidly. So we've managed to do that, and we provide a package where if a customer approaches and say they got a special application, it may not be big volumes, but we always look at it as an opportunity. Let's look at it, and we will try and engineer our product to suit.
So what's an example of that?
So we have launched a product called ultrafine cements, which are really significantly finer cements than the normal cements you get. They're used in niche applications like tunneling. When you actually go to some underground mines, you hit some fissures and water comes out of it, and they need to stop that water to impede their activities. So this cement can actually act very quickly to seal those. So it's still finding its feet in the market, but that's an example of what we've done with special applications like that.
That's interesting.
Sorry.
We're just talking about your growth and how the business is going. Obviously, there's a lot of construction going on in Queensland at the moment, infrastructure. Are you benefiting from that? Are your sort of sales going up in recent year or recent years?
I think there is a correlation between infrastructure activity and volume and business generated. So if you look at New South Wales and Victoria, there is a huge pipeline of infrastructure activity there in both those states. So in both those states, people in our sector are doing extremely well. Queensland is not yet there, but if Cross River Rail really does go ahead, fully funded, goes ahead, Queen's Wharf next year, the new parallel runway at the Brisbane Airport. So there are a few things in the pipeline.
The runway would be a lot of concrete, I imagine.
Yes. So all those things will generate activity in our area, and there needs to be a pipeline because ours is a very capital-intensive industry. We cannot turn off and on and then go through those cycles, big variations. So there needs to be a steady pipeline for us to keep servicing those jobs. But I'm sure they will come as these projects are coming into fruition.
Thanks, Rajeev. We have a question from Daniel Willis, who's listening in. Thanks, Daniel. It's to Dennis. He says, you make a good point about setting up a board of advisors to companies. My question is, are there regulations set up that make companies appoint a day-to-day board of advisors to support the board that only sit for a minimum amount of times throughout the year? Is there regulations around this?
No, there's no, and thanks, Daniel. There's no regulation as such in terms of an advisory board is generally seen as good business practice when an owner-operator is growing his business, his or her business, and wants some independent advice. And certainly, sort of not just me, but some of my colleagues throughout the firm have sort of been in that capacity, which is a slightly more involved role of being an advisory board member, and that simply means a panel of advisors, and you're there to actually support. When you get into when you get into the listed company space, that is when the regularity of meetings is then written into the constitution. So it's not necessarily regulated by the regulator, but it's a self-governing document that effectively dictates how often each board member, the board should actually meet, and the regularity should really be dependent on, I guess, where the business is at and what level of support the executives require so far as guidance is concerned from the board.
Okay, that's good. Thanks. Yeah, thanks. So just getting back to growth and expansion, question for you, Dennis, especially with private companies, sometimes owners obviously retire, or they grow to an extent that attracts a buyer, a bigger buyer, or a listed company wants to buy the smaller operation. What are some of the issues around succession or exiting a business that you have experience with?
Yeah, I find this to be a very, very large topic, especially with the baby boomers and so forth. Because
what are the sort of pitfalls or dangers?
For sure. I think this is where some independent advice can really, really help in terms of because as an owner who has been in the business for a very long time, you have a natural affiliation and emotional attachment, which is 100% appreciated and understood. But the question is, do I actually pass it on to whether it's someone who has been with me for a very long time. It could also be a relative, naturally, one of your offsprings. Do I introduce a strategic investor with a plan to ultimately exit, or do I turn my shareholding into something more liquid by listing on the ASX, so I can actually decide later on by going public? There are some real sort of factors to consider that are very, very specific to I guess each person. But what I would certainly recommend is making sure that you start to think about those options way before you are doing it. So start to contemplate what those options may be, because unfortunately, generally the business that I've seen, they are not ready to be sold on the day that they want to be sold. So there's,
be prepared.
There's generally a journey. There's generally a journey. Yeah, that's right. And what that basically means is every person enjoys having options, and the more you prepare, the more options you will then have, and also the more objective you will be in assessing what those options are and how feasible they may be.
Thanks for joining us on this Facebook Live event. I'm Glen Norris from the Courier Mail, and we're talking about business essentials, growing a business, starting a business, corporate governance, and exiting a business. We have Jack Steggall here from Steggall's Nutrition. You're a small business, Jack. Have you got an exit strategy? Your wife obviously will want to retire at some stage. Have you thought about this issue?
Well, our accountant keeps reminding us about it, yes, we have done something about it. So, some time ago, about a year ago, we sat down with our accountant, and he engaged a external consultant to start the process. And as was mentioned just previously, it is a fairly long process, a much longer process than what I thought it was. It's more involved than selling a piece of real estate or a product. There's a lot to it. So in our case, the accountant and external consultant looked at our figures over the previous 5 years, projected out over the next 4 years, drilling into mainly our profit and loss statement, looking at our sales, our gross profit, our overhead costs, trying to work out what that would be over the next 3 or 4 years. And quite a long report was produced, and at the end of it all, a valuation was determined on the business. So that gave us a starting point, at least a starting point to work from, in case anybody did come along and want to make us an offer. We don't really have any plans to exit, but as was repeatedly pointed out to us by our accountants, you need to get this in place now for later on. So we've got that process going, and it will be reviewed every 12 months and updated as our figures change. So, yeah, like I don't think we're likely to list on the ASX. Probably the best outcome for us would be if a larger company did come along and make us an offer. That would fit very well for us. A strategic offer from a larger firm would probably give us the best price. So that's what we would be looking for. We're in no hurry to sell. We have restructured the business as a part of that process we went through with the accountant and the external consultant. I'm now not as involved as I was before. I've been sidelined to some extent. Other senior managers in the organisation have been shuffled around so that the firm is not as dependent on me.
So you could go for a caravan holiday or something. And
yes,
the company would survive.
Yes, that's right, and we'll be testing that fairly shortly.
Oh, okay. That was a lucky guess.
Either that or a lot of golf. I'm not sure which. Or alternatively, the opportunity to do things in the business that I enjoy. Like the business started with sales and technical. That's my background. Along the way, it changed and we sort of required skills that I don't have a lot of. But now this now gives me the opportunity to go back and do what I enjoy doing if I choose to keep staying in the business rather than going on holidays or playing golf. So there's a few options there.
Yeah, well, it sounds like Jack's got it sorted out. He's done his homework and he's got advisors in.
Good accountant.
Yeah, good accountant. Maybe video.
Has your interest at heart, and I think that's important.
I presume I can't mention their name.
No, it doesn't bother me.
Oh, okay. Well, it's Cooper Reeves.
Good people.
Okay, I'm pleased to hear that.
So it sounds like Jack is doing everything right, but I think, Dennis, you were saying earlier, people leave it too late. What's the sort of worst sort of example you've seen of that?
Some of them are a bit traumatic to actually mention.
Just,
because,
just in general terms.
Yeah, the general sort of medical accidents. They are the ones that you really don't want to face.
Yeah.
And
or sickness, I mentioned.
That's right, sickness. Or sometimes the less traumatic are global events that are outside of your control. So your industry may be hit by a particular factor, whether it's foreign currency, whether it's regulatory changes, and all of that reduce your options. All of that reduce your options. So the planning is something that I think many owners and operators do not want to consider because they enjoy the business, they enjoy running the business. To actually consider exiting, I very often get very large numbers by the vendors because they think, well, if you're going to get me to think about that, then I might as well give you an astronomical number.
It's a bit like selling a house. Selling a house, you always want the big
I guess the other factor is if you're plateaued in your growth, that is not the point at which you want to sell, because exit the business because you actually want to give potential buyers some growth trajectory as well.
Yeah, and that's right, and certainly, I mean, I have similar to Jack. One of my sort of most interested areas is in food and FMCG, which is generally a very high growth area, especially in brands, especially if you're in boutique or if you're in the independent space. And the only defense is to attack. The only defense is to continue to innovate, to continue to come up with new products, to continue to actually stay ahead of the curve. And you really need that DNA to be built into the organization. What that means is it has to be beyond the owner. And to pass on a DNA from an owner to an organization takes a long time.
Yeah.
It takes a long time.
Yeah. It's like Apple when Steve Jobs died. Obviously, it was a big enough company to keep that, as you say, DNA, but a lot of it was his personality that created the brand, created the products. So have you sort of seen businesses where the owner has been so much a part of the company that once that person has exited, have they struggled or even failed?
Unfortunately, too often. Yeah,
Okay.
unfortunately, too often. And you know what I would say to certainly the business owners out there is, if that were to happen, then you haven't built a good enough business.
Okay.
The very idea of building a good business is to ensure that it can actually take the various impacts, including making yourself redundant.
Yeah, it's a whole idea of corporate structure, I suppose, and it continues on. Yeah. We have another question for you, Dennis, on that area.
Yes.
What is your biggest piece of advice to encourage businesses to make succession exit planning a priority?
My biggest advice.
Yeah, biggest piece of advice. Yeah.
Well, I think Jack said it quite well. You know, in terms of do speak to your accountant, and I think before you go to bed at night, I think the best way to motivate yourself would be, what if I don't wake up tomorrow?
That's a cheery thought.
What if I don't wake up tomorrow? And just write down a list. Just write down a list, and I think that could be just the impetus or the catalyst one requires to say, maybe I do need to give this a bit more thought.
No, good advice. Thanks for joining us on the Facebook Live and the CCIQ and BDO Facebook Live event. I'm Glen Norris from the Courier Mail, and we're talking about business essentials, exit plans, growing the business, and corporate governance. We've had a really good discussion tonight and some really good expert advice from our panellists. I thought we'd just finish it off tonight by asking each one of them, sorry to put them on the spot, what's been their biggest or their hardest challenge in business over the years? And Rajeev, you've been in business a long time. What's been the biggest challenge for you?
I think for any business, I think this is applicable, that you need to get the people who subscribe to the vision and the culture that you're trying to build. Sometimes you inherit a team, and then to mold that culture and to get everyone aligned to that is the biggest challenge I've ever seen. It is very possible, it is very rewarding when you get there, but the journey is often quite difficult. So you have to take some very tough decisions along the way in terms of parting company with certain people or taking some very hard decisions about the way that the business is going. So once you get that culture established and the right people in the business, it's much easier to drive the business in the way you want to.
But it must be hard to get that culture sometimes.
It is. And culture is very intangible. It's not something you can actually, like Play-Doh, take it and mold it. It is something that is intangible, but it is the lived experience in a business. So it's the way you conduct, the way your leadership team conducts, and that's very important, that you actually show that visible leadership so that people can look at the culture and say, that is the culture this organization has. And to get the people who genuinely subscribe to that is the most important thing, because in our industry, I could say anyone with capital equipment can actually make cement. That's, and some expertise can make cement. But to make it in the way you want, to add value to it the way you want, and to look after your customers the way you want, that is more.
And as you were saying, Sunstate's doing the value adding, the new products, and you obviously seem to have the culture right.
Very much so, and that's really our culture. I mean, even though we got some big shareholders behind us, the feel of Sunstate is of a small family business, and that's the way we deal with our people and our customers, and that is a unique blend of the support from the large corporates behind you to give you the resources, etc. But then you're allowed to actually go and do your own thing. That's a fantastic mix, and that's a great success factor behind the success of Sunstate, I would say.
Thanks very much. Dennis, what's been the most difficult challenge for you?
I think the most challenging for me would be being able to communicate your clear strategy and executing it with rather engaging leadership, and then be in a position to make some very hard decisions that's purely based on business, when you have already developed some personal relationships with the people that have worked with you.
Are you a bit of a softie?
I am, yes. but at the same time, I can also be very hard.
Oh, okay.
And I think that's where it is very difficult, because all businesses are built by people, and you develop some really long-term relationships with people.
But as you say, you've got to make the hard decisions.
But you have to make the hard decisions.
It's all about keeping the business, the doors open. You've got to make a profit.
Yes, and that's always the hardest. But you need to have everyone's interest at heart. So.
Very good, thank you. Jack?
I agree. It's the hard decisions that have been the biggest challenges for me. Whether those hard decisions are around people or a process, it's something that I've struggled with. And I terminated somebody for the first time. That was a major milestone for me. But since then, I've done it several more times.
Okay.
I can't say it
So is that the hardest thing is that the hardest thing in business?
For me,
dismissing somebody?
For me, it is. And other people would see it differently. For example, with my partner Linda, with her, it's more around finance. We've had times in the company when we were struggling enormously financially. I've had to get on the phone and tell suppliers that we're not paying them for 60 days, 90 days. But that didn't faze me a great deal.
Okay.
But when it comes to terminating somebody, I struggle to sleep at night.
So is that because it's a sort of, I suppose, a smaller business, it's sort of a family in some respects?
Yeah, I think there's a bit more emotional attachment, and you put a reasonable investment into people, and you find that person hasn't turned out quite the way you thought. Some people I find don't work as well in a team environment as you would hope and think. They do a good job on their own, but put them in a room with 2 or 3 other people, and there's a whole lot of mechanics going on that sometimes just doesn't play out very well. So that's been a challenge for me in our business is holding and training the right people, and it's just an incredibly important part of the business.
I suppose it gets back to the fact business is about people, and to let people go. Raj, have you sort of struggled with that aspect of the business? Obviously, you've got cyclical declines in the business where you probably didn't need as many people as.
Yeah, remarkably, through all those cycles, the recession we need to have, the GFC, etc., our workforce has been very, very stable. We've always employed about 60 people.
Yes, okay.
So we were able to ride those ups and downs very successfully.
Okay.
So we've got a model which enables us to do that. So that's been great. I echo Jack's comments. Some of those people issues are the hardest ones you have. I mean, when you have to let go of someone who's been with the business for a long time, for the outsiders it looks very easy. It's been done very clinically, but the amount of heartburn you go through to get to that point, a lot of people don't actually see. So that's I agree with Jack's point there. As leaders, that is something that we all share, even though sometimes you have to do that.
Well, I think we'll leave it there tonight. Thanks very much for tuning in to the BDO and CCIQ Facebook Live event, talking about business essentials. We've had some great comments tonight, some great advice, and thanks for the questions people have sent in. This will be available, the recording will be available on the BDO Facebook page later on, so please delve in and listen to the comments if you're sort of interested in a particular area of the show. But thanks again again for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Glen.
Thank you.
Thank you.